Every generation of Brazilian fans has grown up being told the same thing, that the Seleção doesn't just compete at World Cups, they own them. 5 titles, the most in history, the only team to qualify for every single edition of the tournament. Brazil doesn't rebuild. Brazil doesn't struggle. Brazil just shows up and wins. So here's the question that should be sitting uncomfortably in the back of your head right now. What if this is the worst time in history to have ever been a Brazil fan? Not just a rough patch, not just a bad tournament. Statistically, structurally, and emotionally, the worst era the Seleção has ever put its supporters through. This video is going to walk you through exactly how bad it's gotten, point by point, in a way most people aren't actually connecting together. Because everyone covers one piece of the story. The 7-1, Neymar's injury, the coaching carousel. But nobody's putting it all in the same room. And there's one detail buried in all of this, one thing almost nobody is talking about, that reframes this entire era in a way that's going to genuinely shock you. I'll get to it at the end. Let's start with the thing that set the tone for everything else. For the first time since the current round-robin qualifying format began in 1996, Brazil finished a South American qualifying campaign with fewer than 30 points. The previous low had been the 2002 cycle when Brazil still managed third place with 30 points. This time around, the Seleção had fewer wins, more losses, and more goals conceded than any other qualifying cycle in this format. 8 wins from 18 games. They qualified 5th, behind Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, and Uruguay. And here's the kicker. Under the old CONMEBOL qualification rules, Brazil would have had to play in the Intercontinental Playoff. They were only saved by the World Cup's expansion to 48 teams, which now sends 6 South American sides through automatically. The most decorated football nation on the planet nearly didn't qualify on merit. Let that sit for a second. And the campaign's single lowest moment? At 4,150 meters altitude in El Alto, Bolivia, Brazil struggled from kickoff. The lack of oxygen compounding a lack of cohesion in a squad, made up of players Ancelotti considered reserves. A VAR-reviewed penalty in first-half stoppage time gave Bolivia the lead. After halftime, even with the introduction of bigger names like Rafinha and Marquinhos, Brazil couldn't find their rhythm or pose any real threat. They lost 1-0 to Bolivia in El Alto with a reserve team. And it officially cemented the worst qualifying campaign in Seleção history. So how did Brazil get here? Because the collapse didn't start on the pitch. It started at the top. Since the end of the 2022 World Cup, the Brazilian national team has been coached by Ramon Menezes, Fernando Diniz, Dorival Jr., and Carlo Ancelotti, 4 managers in roughly 3 years. Each one arrived with a plan. None of them lasted long enough to build one, and then the CBF itself imploded in real time, almost on cue. 3 days after Ancelotti's appointment was announced, CBF President Ednaldo Rodrigues was deposed, and the federation came to be presided over by Samir Chaud. The case against Rodrigues centered on an allegedly forged signature from a predecessor who reportedly wasn't mentally competent when he supposedly signed the document that had legitimized Rodrigues' re-election. And it was the second time a Brazilian court had removed him from office. The federation supposed to be steering a World Cup campaign was simultaneously fighting off a governance coup. You genuinely could not make this up. Now, the coaching situation is where it gets interesting, because the CBF's solution to all of this was to do something the Brazilian national team had never done in its entire history. They hired a foreign coach. Carlo Ancelotti became the first non-Brazilian ever to coach the Seleção at a World Cup. And the strange detail most people skip right past. Ancelotti had only set foot in Brazil once before taking the job, back in 2000, while scouting players as Juventus' manager. The man they handed the most storied football program on earth to had essentially never been there. And the negotiations to get him? They didn't happen overnight. Talks between Ancelotti and the CBF had been going on and off for more than 2 years before he finally said yes, meaning the savior narrative had actually been brewing long before the crisis peaked, not as a response to it. Now here's where the story gets personal. Because all of this was happening while Brazil's biggest star was watching from a hospital bed. Neymar tore his ACL and meniscus in October 2023 in a qualifying match against Uruguay. By the time he was even back in training, he'd been sidelined roughly 700 days. And the part almost nobody mentions, his father later revealed that Neymar had seriously considered retiring, telling him he couldn't take it anymore. Think about what that means for a fan base that had spent years being told Neymar was the guy who was going to finally bring the six-star home. By the time he actually played a competitive minute for Brazil again at this World Cup, it had been 980 days since his last appearance, and he got roughly 14 minutes off the bench. And while all of that was unfolding, two of Brazil's active internationals got caught up in betting-fixing scandals. Lucas Paquetá was formally charged by England's FA over allegations he deliberately picked up yellow cards to benefit bets traced back to his own neighborhood in Rio, and still played for Brazil at Copa America while the case was pending. Separately, Flamengo's Bruno Henrique was indicted for allegedly forcing a yellow card in a 2023 club match to benefit gamblers, including his own family members, in what investigators called Operation Spot Fixing. 2 players, 2 separate investigations, 1 qualifying cycle. The sport's integrity problems and Brazil's problems managed to collide at the worst possible time. So with all of that chaos as the backdrop, how has the actual World Cup gone? Honestly, better than the qualifying suggested it would. Brazil advanced to the knockout stages after Vinicius Jr. netted twice in a 3-0 win over Scotland, topping Group C with 7 points and a +6 goal difference. Gabriel Martinelli then scored in stoppage time to beat Japan 2-1 in the round of 32. Martinelli's 96th minute winner became the latest winning goal in regular time in World Cup knockout stage history. Brazil are through, they're alive, they're looking like a team again. But here's where that open loop I mentioned at the start comes back around, because surviving the group stage and beating Japan doesn't erase the pattern. It just delays the reckoning. Brazil haven't beaten a European team in a World Cup knockout round since 2002. France ended their run in 2006, the Netherlands in 2010, Germany infamously in 2014. We don't need to revisit the scoreline. Then Belgium and Croatia in the 2 cycles after that. It's a streak most people treat as a collection of isolated moments, rather than what it actually is, a 20-plus year hex against European opposition in the rounds that matter. And now Brazil face Norway in the round of 16 on Sunday, July 5th. Norway won their first ever knockout stage game in World Cup history, with Erling Haaland and Antonio Nusa both finding the net in a 2-1 win over Ivory Coast. So Brazil's path to the quarterfinals runs directly through a European team with one of the most dangerous strikers alive. The Hex gets its next test in 4 days. And then there's Endrick, which is the thing almost nobody is framing correctly. He was supposed to be the wonderkid who gives this whole rebuild a runway into the future. He joined Real Madrid for a fee that could reach upward of 60 million euros, but he played just 847 minutes in his debut Madrid season, mostly off the bench, and eventually had to go on loan to Lyon just to get regular playing time. At this World Cup, he didn't feature at all against Morocco in the group stage and has made only brief cameos since, to the point that fan frustration has turned him into a running meme during the tournament. The heir apparent to Neymar is fighting for minutes at his own World Cup. If you're finding this as fascinating as I am, drop a comment below. I want to know where you think this Brazil era actually ends. Do they win at this tournament, or does the Hex hold? That conversation is already going in the comments, and it's worth getting into. And if you want to go deeper on the full story of Brazil's 2014 collapse and how it connects to everything happening now, that video is right there. It fills in a lot of the blanks. But here's the thing that reframes all of it. The thing I told you I'd get to. The current World Cup title holder is Argentina, who won the 2022 tournament. And anyone in Brazil who is under roughly 27 years old has no living memory of their country winning a World Cup. An entire generation of Brazilian fans has grown up watching the most historically successful football nation on earth. 5 titles more than anyone. Not just lose, but lose in ways that leave scars. The 7-1 at home, the ACL in qualifying, the governance meltdown, the coaching carousel, the betting scandals, the wonderkid who can't get minutes, the 20-year drought against European teams in knockout football. This isn't one bad tournament. This is a generation-long identity crisis for the most football-obsessed country on the planet. And the reason it hit so hard is because the expectation was never just to compete. It was to win. Always. That's what 5 World Cups does to a fan base. It doesn't build resilience. It builds a standard that every subsequent failure gets measured against. Brazil are still alive at this World Cup. They still have Vinicius. They still have Ancelotti on the bench. And 4 days from now, they have a chance to break a 24-year curse against European opposition in a knockout match. If they do it, this whole era looks different in hindsight. If they don't, well, the story writes itself. Either way, you're watching history. The question is just which kind.